Waitress begs Vampire King to hide her from her husband. What he did next was shocking. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get started with today's tale. In a small town, tucked away from the hustle and bustle of the city, lived a woman named Emma. She worked long hours as a waitress at a local diner, barely scraping by. But her life was anything but ordinary. Behind the scenes, Emma lived in fear. Her husband, Mark, was a man who had once been kind but had slowly turned into someone she no longer recognized. He became violent and abusive, and the moments of peace were fewer and fewer. Every day was a struggle, but Emma kept going, hoping for a way out, a way to escape her torment. One stormy evening, after another long shift, Emma found herself walking home, her heart racing in her chest. Mark had threatened her again that night, his words like poison in her ears. She was terrified, not knowing if she would make it back home without another fight. As she walked through the darkened streets, her thoughts consumed with fear, she spotted a figure in the distance. Tall, commanding, his presence exuded an aura that made Emma stop in her tracks. It was the man who had been rumored to be living in the old mansion on the hill, the one who never seemed to leave. He was known as the Vampire King, a man of immense power, who only came out at night. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She had heard the whispers about him, how he was dangerous, how he had the power to control minds and make people do things against their will. But something in his eyes, something about the way he looked at her, made her feel safe for the first time in ages. As the wind howled around them, Emma's fear was replaced by a strange sense of calm. She hesitated for a moment, but then, with a courage she didn't know she had, she stepped forward and approached him. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, can you help me? My husband, he's going to hurt me again." The Vampire King looked down at her, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. For a moment, there was silence. Then, in a voice that was both cold and comforting, he spoke. "You're safe now. No one will harm you again." Emma's heart fluttered in her chest. She didn't know how or why, but in that moment, she believed him. The Vampire King's voice held a promise that her life would be different, that she would no longer have to live in fear. As she followed him into the shadows, she couldn't help but wonder what would come next. Could he truly protect her from the man she feared most? Or would this be the beginning of something even more dangerous? Only time would tell. But for now, Emma had found a glimmer of hope, a chance for a new life away from the man who had once been her world but had now become her nightmare. The Vampire King led Emma through the dark, winding alleys of the old mansion's estate. The storm had picked up, rain now pouring down in sheets, but Emma felt a strange sense of calm in his presence. She had no idea what was happening, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid. As they reached the massive iron gates that guarded the mansion, the Vampire King turned to her, his face illuminated only by the flickering lights from the mansion's windows. "You are safe now," he said, his voice low and steady. "No harm will come to you here." Emma nodded, unsure of what to say. She had never been in a place like this, surrounded by such wealth and mystery. The mansion loomed before them, its stone walls towering above her. The air felt different, colder, but she found it strangely comforting. They entered the mansion, and Emma was immediately struck by the lavish surroundings. Everything was so grand, so immaculate. Candles flickered in ornate sconces, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Velvet curtains draped over the tall windows, and the faint scent of incense filled the air. The floors were marble, cold under her bare feet as she walked alongside the Vampire King, who seemed completely unfazed by the atmosphere. "This is your home now, if you wish it," he said, his voice almost a whisper. Emma didn't know how to respond. It felt surreal to be here, in the presence of someone who could offer her protection, someone who seemed to possess a power beyond anything she had ever known. She had never imagined her life would lead her to a place like this, and she wasn't sure if she should feel grateful or terrified. She had always thought of the Vampire King as nothing more than a rumor, a mythical creature who lived only in whispers. but here he was, standing right next to her. The door to a large sitting room opened, and the Vampire King gestured for Emma to enter. She hesitated, her nerves starting to catch up with her. This was all too much, too fast. But there was no turning back now. She stepped inside, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was cozy, despite the cold that seemed to hang in the air. A fire crackled in the grand fireplace, and plush armchairs surrounded a low wooden table. There was something about the warmth of the fire that made Emma feel safe. She sat down in one of the armchairs, trying to gather her thoughts. The Vampire King moved to the opposite side of the room, standing tall and regal, his eyes fixed on her. "I understand you've been running from your husband," he said, his voice soft but piercing. "You've been living in fear, hiding from someone you once loved, but who no longer deserves that title." Emma swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. She nodded, unable to speak. She had never admitted it out loud before, but now, in this strange, foreign place, she could no longer hide the truth from herself. Mark had changed, become someone she feared, and she had spent far too long convincing herself that things would get better. But now, sitting in front of this powerful man, she realized just how deep her fear ran. "I've watched many humans come and go," the Vampire King continued. "Some seek power, some seek revenge, but few seek redemption. Few seek the freedom to live without fear. But you," he paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You have the strength to start over. You have the power to change your life." Emma looked up at him, surprised by his words. She had never seen herself as strong, never thought she had the power to change anything. But something in his gaze made her believe he was right. She was here now, in this mansion, away from her abusive husband, and maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to rebuild her life. But how? What would she do next? "You don't have to decide anything now," the Vampire King said, as if reading her thoughts. "Rest. Let the weight of the world slip away for a while. Tomorrow, we will discuss what comes next." With that, he turned and left the room, leaving Emma to her thoughts. As she sat there, the firelight flickering across the room, she realized how much had changed in just a few hours. She had gone from running for her life to sitting in the heart of a mansion, protected by a Vampire King. And despite the fear still gnawing at her, despite the uncertainty of what lay ahead, she couldn't help but feel a small glimmer of hope. Tomorrow would be the beginning of something new, something better. The next morning, Emma woke up in a large, comfortable bed that she had never thought she would sleep in. The room was warm, with sunlight filtering through the heavy velvet curtains, casting a soft glow on the elegant furnishings. She could still feel the dampness of the storm from last night, but now, everything was calm. Her heart was still racing, and the anxiety she had carried with her for so long was not entirely gone. But there was something different. She was no longer in fear for her life. The Vampire King's promise echoed in her mind. "No harm will come to you here." She took a deep breath and got out of bed, her bare feet touching the soft carpet. It felt like a dream she hadn't expected but was now living. She walked over to the window, peeking through the curtains. The mansion stretched out before her, surrounded by lush gardens and ancient trees that seemed to whisper in the wind. It was a world so different from the one she had known in the small town, a world of wealth and power, a world she was still trying to understand. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. At the door. "Come in," Emma said, her voice still a bit shaky. The door opened, and a woman entered, dressed in a simple but elegant gown. She had a kind face, with soft, welcoming eyes. "Good morning, Miss Emma," the woman said, her voice gentle. "His Majesty has requested your presence in the dining room." Emma nodded, still unsure of how to behave in this new life. "Thank you," she replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. As she walked to the dining room, her mind raced. What would happen today? Would the Vampire King keep his word? And what exactly was he expecting from her? She entered the grand dining hall, a large room with high ceilings and massive windows that looked out onto the estate. At the head of the table sat the Vampire King, his presence as commanding as it had been the night before. He looked up as she entered, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. "Good morning, Emma," he said, his voice deep and steady. "Please, join me." She hesitated for a moment, then walked forward, taking a seat across from him. The table was set with a beautiful breakfast spread, fresh fruit, warm bread, and steaming cups of coffee. But Emma was too nervous to eat. She picked at her food, unsure of what to say or how to behave. The Vampire King didn't seem to mind. He took a sip of his coffee and studied her, as if weighing something in his mind. Finally, he spoke. "I know this is all overwhelming for you," he said, his voice softening slightly. "You've been through a lot, and I want you to know that you are safe here. But now, we need to decide what comes next." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to be so direct. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Vampire King leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. "You are no longer under the threat of your husband, but that does not mean your life will be free of danger. There are others who will want to use you for their own gain. I can protect you, but you must decide how far you want to go." Emma blinked, trying to process what he was saying. She had never considered what would come after escaping. Her husband. She had only known fear and survival. But now, there was a possibility for something more. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling inside her. The Vampire King's gaze softened. "I want you to stay here, to remain under my protection. But beyond that, the choice is yours. You can live as you did before, in fear and hiding, or you can choose to embrace this new life. You will have the freedom to decide who you want to be." Emma's mind raced. She had never been given a choice like this before. Everything had always been about survival, about getting through the next day. But now, she was being offered something more. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. "And if I stay?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The Vampire King nodded. "You will have my protection, and you will not have to live in fear again. You will be free to do as you wish, with no one to harm you." Emma thought for a moment. She had always been afraid to make decisions, always second-guessed herself. But now, in this strange new world, it felt like she could finally have control over her life. "I want to stay," she said, her voice stronger now. "I want to be free." The Vampire King smiled, a small, almost imperceptible smile that made her heart skip a beat. "Then you shall have it. This is your new life, Emma. You will never have to hide again." As they sat in silence, Emma realized something she had never allowed herself to feel before: hope. The world was still a frightening place, but for the first time, she felt like she had a chance to rebuild. She wasn't running anymore. She was finally choosing her own path. The days that followed were unlike anything Emma had ever experienced. She woke each morning in the luxurious room provided to her by the Vampire King, her fears of the past slowly dissolving with each passing moment. The mansion, with its cold stone walls and grand halls, became her refuge, a place where she could finally breathe without looking over her shoulder. As the weeks went by, Emma grew accustomed to her new life, but it was not without challenges. Despite the protection the Vampire King offered, the world she had stepped into was unlike any she had ever known. Every day brought new mysteries, new questions. She had thought she was escaping one nightmare, but now, she was stepping into a world of power, ancient creatures, and politics that were far beyond her understanding. One morning, after breakfast, the Vampire King summoned her to the library. She walked down the grand hallway, her footsteps echoing in the stillness of the mansion. The library was a vast, dark room, lined with ancient bookshelves filled with tomes that seemed to whisper secrets from centuries past. The Vampire King stood by a large table, his sharp eyes watching her as she approached. "Emma," he said in his usual calm, commanding tone. "We need to talk about what comes next." She nodded, unsure of what to expect. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. The Vampire King motioned for her to sit. "You are safe here," he said, his voice steady. "But this world is full of danger. There are forces who will stop at nothing to take what they want. The protection I offer will only last if you understand the stakes." Emma sat down, her heart pounding in her chest. She had known her life would change when she accepted his offer, but she hadn't fully understood what that meant. "I've kept you hidden from your husband," he continued. "But there are other dangers. Your husband will not be the only threat you face." She felt a chill run down her spine at his words. "Who else?" she whispered, her fear returning. The Vampire King's eyes darkened, his expression grave. "There are other vampire families, powerful ones. They do not take kindly to the idea of someone like you being protected by me." Emma swallowed hard. She had no idea that her life could still be in danger. "I don't want to live in fear anymore," she said, her voice trembling. The Vampire King leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. You don't have to, he said, his voice softening. But if you wish to stay in this world, you must learn how to navigate it. You must be prepared for what's coming. Emma stared at him, her heart heavy. She had never wanted this kind of life. All she had ever wanted was to be free from fear, free from the terror that had controlled her life for so long. But now, in this world, there were no simple answers. What do I need to do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Vampire King paused for a moment, his eyes searching hers. Learn, he said simply. Learn about the world you are now a part of. Learn about the people who hold power. And most importantly, learn about yourself. You are more important in this world than you realize. Emma felt a weight settle in her chest. She had never seen herself as important, never thought she had anything to offer. But the Vampire King's words stirred something deep within her. Maybe she could be more than just a victim. Maybe she could take control of her life for the first time. I will teach you, the Vampire King said, breaking into her thoughts. But you must be willing to learn. You must be ready to embrace what lies ahead. Emma nodded slowly, determination rising within her. She had no choice but to trust him. She had no choice but to face the unknown. And maybe, just maybe, this was her chance to truly start over, to finally find the strength she had always been searching for. As she left the library, her mind was swirling with the possibilities. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she had a chance to shape it. She wasn't just running from her past anymore. She was stepping into a new life, one that was hers to control. Days turned into weeks, and Emma's life at the mansion slowly began to shift. At first, it felt like a strange dream. This world of wealth, power, and mystery was so far from the life she had known. But as time passed, she found herself adapting. She started learning about the ancient vampire world, about the intricate web of power that governed the lives of those like the Vampire King. The Vampire King had kept his promise. He had kept her safe, and in return, she had slowly begun to embrace the lessons he had taught her. The mansion was filled with knowledge, books, scrolls, and ancient texts. She spent hours in the library, reading about the vampire world, its history, its rules, and its politics. The Vampire King himself would occasionally join her, offering guidance. But mostly, he watched her with a quiet, patient understanding. He had warned her that there would be danger, other vampire families who would not tolerate her being protected by him. They were powerful, ruthless, and would stop at nothing to control what they saw as theirs. Emma's growing knowledge made her realize just how true his words were. The world around her was a constant battle for power, and she was now a part of that struggle. But despite the weight of it all, Emma no longer felt like a helpless pawn. She was learning to navigate this world, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she had some control over her destiny. One evening, as the sun began to set, the Vampire King summoned her to the grand dining room. She entered to find him standing by the large window, looking out at the darkening sky. His silhouette was imposing, but there was a softness in his demeanor that she had come to appreciate. You're learning well, he said without turning around. But there's more you need to understand. It's not just about knowledge. It's about survival. Emma walked toward him, standing just a few feet away. What do you mean? She asked, her voice steady. The Vampire King turned to face her, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The other vampire families, he began. They are not just going to let you live here in peace. They will try to test you, to challenge you. And when they do, you will need to make a choice. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She had always known that this world was dangerous, but hearing it from him made it feel real. What kind of choice? She asked, her voice tight with apprehension. A choice between running and fighting, the Vampire King replied. Between accepting your place as a pawn or standing your ground as a player in this game. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. She had never been a fighter. She had spent her whole life running from her abusive husband, running from the fear that had consumed her. But something about the Vampire King's words made her pause. She wasn't the same person she had been when she first arrived. She had learned, she had grown stronger, and for the first time, she was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could fight. I don't want to be a pawn, she said, her voice firmer than she had expected. The Vampire King gave her a rare, approving smile. Then you will need to prove it, he said. You will need to face the challenges that come, and you will need to choose who you want to be in this world. Emma nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. She had no idea what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She was not going to let fear control her any longer. The days passed, and the tension in the mansion grew. Emma could feel it in the air, like a storm brewing just beyond the horizon. The Vampire King had become more distant, more preoccupied with something. She knew it had to do with the other vampire families. He was preparing for something, and she was part of it. One night, as Emma was walking through the mansion's vast hallways, she overheard a conversation between the Vampire King and one of his trusted advisors. "She's still too weak," the advisor was saying. "She's not ready for what's coming." "She will be," the Vampire King replied, his voice low and firm. "She has to be." Emma stopped in her tracks, her heart racing. She didn't know what they were talking about, but she understood the implication. She wasn't just being kept safe, she was being prepared for something. But what? She had no idea, but she knew one thing. Whatever it was coming soon. As she lay in bed that night, Emma couldn't sleep. Her mind was swirling with questions, with doubts. Was she truly ready for this? Could she really stand up to the dangers that were approaching? She didn't know. But what she did know was that she wasn't going to let fear control her anymore. She was ready to face whatever came next. And with that thought, Emma finally fell into a restless sleep, her heart pounding with both anticipation and fear. She had a new life now, one full of uncertainty, but also full of possibilities. And she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. The tension that had been building for weeks finally reached its peak one fateful evening. Emma sat in her room, staring out the window at the darkening sky. The Vampire King had been more distant lately, his usual calm demeanor replaced by an intensity that seemed to grow with each passing day. She could feel it in the air, the sense of something looming, something she couldn't yet understand. She had spent weeks training, learning, preparing for whatever was coming. But now, it felt as though the moment of truth was finally at hand. The Vampire King had warned her that there would be a time when she would need to choose where she stood, a time when she would have to face the consequences of living in this world. That time had arrived. Emma had grown more confident in herself, in her newfound strength. The world of vampires, once so foreign and terrifying, had begun to feel like a place she could navigate. The knowledge she had acquired, the lessons she had learned, were no longer just theories. They were tools, and she was ready to use them. But tonight, something was different. There was a storm outside, the wind howling and the rain pounding against the windows. It was a reflection of the storm inside the mansion, a tension that Emma could feel in her bones. As she sat in the grand hallway, waiting for the Vampire King to summon her, she heard the distant sound of voices. They were low, urgent. The doors to the study were open, and Emma could hear the Vampire King speaking with someone in a tone that was unfamiliar, an edge of worry in his voice. She rose from her seat, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to know what was happening. She walked quietly toward the study, moving as silently as she could. As she approached the door, she could hear bits of the conversation. "We can't delay any longer." The Vampire King's voice echoed through the hallway. "The others are already making their moves. If we wait, it will be too late." Emma's pulse quickened. She recognized the urgency in his voice. The danger was real. The other vampire families, the ones the Vampire King had warned her about, were making their move. It was now or never. She took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had no idea what the consequences of this meeting would be, but she knew one thing. She couldn't be a passive observer any longer. She had to choose. She had to fight for her place in this world. Stepping into the study, Emma found the Vampire King standing near the large fireplace, his back turned to her. His eyes, usually so controlled and calculating, were filled with something darker now. Anger, determination, a cold fire that made her heart skip a beat. "Emma," he said without turning around. "You're here. I need to speak with you." Emma nodded, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "What's happening?" she asked, her words coming out sharper than she had intended. The Vampire King finally turned to face her. His gaze softened for a moment, but there was no time for comfort now. "The time has come," he said. "The vampire families are closing in. They've heard whispers about you, about your connection to me, and they won't stop until they have control." Emma felt the weight of his words. This was what she had been preparing for. This was the moment. What do I need to do? She asked, her voice steady. The Vampire King stepped closer, his eyes intense. You need to stand with me, Emma. You need to show them that you won't be controlled, that you are not just some pawn in their game. Emma's heart raced. She wasn't sure what exactly that would mean, but she knew one thing. She wasn't going to back down. She had spent too long living in fear to let anyone take control of her life again. I'm ready, she said, her voice firm. The Vampire King's expression softened, a rare moment of approval in his gaze. I knew you were stronger than you realized, he said, his voice quieter now. But remember this, Emma, this world is full of dangers. You will have to fight for your place here. Emma nodded, determination filling her chest. She had no idea what would happen next, but she was no longer the woman she had been when she arrived at the mansion. She was stronger now, and for the first time, she felt like she could truly choose her own path. The storm outside raged on, the wind howling through the trees, but inside the mansion, there was a quiet sense of resolve. Emma knew that what lay ahead would be difficult, but she was ready to face it. The Vampire King had given her a chance to take control of her life and make her own choices. And she wasn't about to let that go. The days that followed were filled with tension as the storm outside grew closer and the world inside the mansion became even more charged with uncertainty. Emma stood at the center of it all, feeling the weight of the choices ahead of her. The Vampire King had prepared her, but nothing could have truly prepared her for what was coming next. The first challenge came when a visitor arrived at the mansion, a figure cloaked in shadows, whose very presence seemed to send a chill through the air. The Vampire King had made it clear that this was no ordinary guest. The other vampire families were growing restless, and they would soon make their move to assert their control. Emma's heart raced as she followed the Vampire King into the grand hall, where the stranger stood waiting. He was tall, with a commanding presence that matched the Vampire King's, but there was something about his demeanor that was unsettling. His eyes glowed with an intensity that reminded Emma of the power she had come to know in the Vampire King. Emma, this is Lord Dorian, the Vampire King said, his voice smooth, but there was an edge to it. He represents one of the most powerful families in the vampire world, and he's come to see if you're truly worth the protection I'm offering. Emma stood taller at the mention of the challenge. She wasn't afraid of Lord Dorian, not anymore. She had learned to hold her own, to trust the strength within her. Lord Dorian's gaze swept over her, and Emma felt the weight of his assessment. I'm here to test you, Lord Dorian said, his voice smooth but cutting. If you can't prove yourself, you won't last in this world. Emma's pulse quickened, but she refused to show fear. She had been tested before, by her husband, by life itself. This was nothing new. What do I need to do? She asked, her voice steady. Lord Dorian smirked, clearly enjoying her composure. You'll see soon enough. The Vampire King's expression was unreadable, but Emma could sense that there was something more to this test. This was not just a challenge for her. It was a message to the other vampire families. She was not a pawn. She was a player. As Lord Dorian led her down a dark corridor, Emma felt her heart race in anticipation. The walls were lined with ancient portraits and tapestries, each one telling a story of power, history, and danger. The mansion, which had once seemed so welcoming, now felt like a maze, a place where every shadow hid something darker. They arrived at a large, dimly lit room, and Emma felt a sense of foreboding. Lord Dorian stood at the door, waiting for her to enter. This is where the test begins, he said. Inside the room, there was a large stone pedestal with what appeared to be an ornate dagger resting on top. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of energy in the air. Emma stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the dagger. Lord Dorian's voice broke the silence. You must prove you are worthy of the protection the Vampire King offers. Take the dagger and show me your resolve. Show me that you are strong enough to survive. Emma hesitated. This was not just a test of strength. It was a test of her resolve, of her ability to take control of her destiny. She had come so far, learned so much, but this moment was different. It was not just about fighting for her life. It was about fighting for her future. She reached out and took the dagger, the cold metal sending a jolt through her hand. The weight of it felt significant, a symbol of the power she was claiming. As she held it in her hand, she felt a surge of confidence. She was no longer the woman who had been trapped in fear. She was someone else now, someone who had chosen to fight for herself. Lord Dorian's eyes narrowed as he watched her. Good, he said, his voice carrying a tone of approval. But the real test is not in your hands. It's in your heart. Will you wield your power wisely, or will it consume you? Emma's heart pounded as she stood there, the dagger still in her hand. She wasn't sure what Lord Dorian meant, but she knew one thing. This was her moment. She had come this far. She wasn't going to back down now. With a deep breath, she raised the dagger and, without a second thought, drove it into the stone pedestal. The moment the dagger touched the stone, a surge of energy pulsed through the room, as if the very walls of the mansion were reacting to her decision. Lord Dorian stepped back, his eyes wide. In surprise, "You have made your choice," he said, his voice heavy with a mixture of respect and caution. The Vampire King stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Emma. "You have passed the test," he said. "But this is only the beginning. The real challenges are yet to come." Emma looked at him, her heart racing but her mind clear. She had proven her resolve. She was ready. The storm outside raged on, but inside the mansion, Emma felt a sense of calm settle over her. She had made her choice. She would fight for her place in this world. And no one, not even the powerful families of the vampire world, could take that from her. The tension that had been building over the past weeks reached a boiling point that Emma could feel deep in her bones. The test she had passed, the decision to stand her ground, had only been the beginning. Now, she was more aware than ever that the world she had stepped into was a battlefield, a place where alliances shifted as easily as the wind, and the consequences of mistakes were far greater than anything she had experienced in her life. The storm outside had finally died down, but the storm inside the mansion was only beginning. Emma sat in the grand study, the heavy scent of old books and rich leather filling the air, as the Vampire King paced in front of her. His normally calm demeanor was now sharp, filled with a palpable energy she couldn't quite place. "We've had our first real test," he said, his voice steady but tinged with something else, something that made Emma sit up straighter. "But this," he continued, pausing to look at her with a seriousness that sent a chill down her spine. "This is where it all begins." She had known there would be more to come, but hearing him say it out loud made the gravity of the situation sink in even deeper. She wasn't a passive observer anymore. She was in the thick of it, and her every choice from now on would affect everything. Her life, her safety, the lives of those she cared about. "What comes next?" Emma asked, her voice steady but with an edge of uncertainty she couldn't hide. The Vampire King turned and met her gaze, his eyes narrowing slightly. "The vampire families will make their move soon. They have been watching, waiting for weakness. They see you, Emma. They see someone who is not afraid to fight, to challenge the power structures they've built for centuries. And that makes you a threat." His words echoed in the room like a drumbeat, and Emma felt the weight of them sink deep into her chest. She had never asked for this kind of life, never imagined herself in the center of a power struggle between ancient vampire families. But here she was, standing at the edge of something far bigger than herself. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, but with a newfound determination. The Vampire King's lips curled into the slightest of smiles, a hint of approval in his eyes. "First, you need to prepare. Prepare yourself mentally, physically, emotionally. Because when they come for you, they will not come with a warning. They will come in force, with power, with cunning. And you will need to outsmart them." Emma's heart raced at the thought. She wasn't used to being part of something so dangerous, but she had no choice now. She had chosen to stand by the Vampire King, and in doing so, she had chosen a life of conflict. But she would not back down. "How do I prepare?" she asked, her voice stronger now, tinged with the urgency of the situation. The Vampire King turned and walked to a large wooden chest near the far wall. He opened it and retrieved an ornate silver dagger, its blade glinting in the dim light of the study. "This is the weapon you will carry," he said, walking toward her. "It is more than just a tool for combat. It is a symbol of your commitment to this world, to the power you now wield." Emma took the dagger from his outstretched hand, the cold metal sending a jolt through her. She felt the weight of it, the responsibility that came with holding such a weapon. "But remember," the Vampire King continued, "it is not the weapon that makes you powerful. It is your mind, your ability to think ahead, to predict your enemy's moves. You must become more than just a fighter. You must become a strategist, a leader. Emma nodded, the seriousness of the task before her settling over her like a heavy cloak. I understand, she said. I will do whatever it takes. The Vampire King gave her a sharp nod, his expression unreadable. Good. But know this, Emma. The world you are entering is ruthless. The moment you let your guard down, the moment you hesitate, they will strike. And there will be no second chances. The words were a harsh reminder of the stakes she was facing, but Emma was no longer afraid. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to back down now. She was ready. She would fight, not just to survive, but to thrive. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady, full of determination. The Vampire King seemed to assess her for a moment before he spoke again, this time with a softer tone. Then you will have everything you need. You will have my protection, my guidance. But you must trust yourself, Emma. Only you can decide how this story ends. As the Vampire King turned and left the room, Emma stood there, holding the silver dagger in her hand, her heart filled with a sense of purpose. She was no longer the frightened woman who had fled from her abusive past. She was someone new, someone who could fight, who could survive in this dangerous world. The path ahead would be filled with obstacles, with enemies who would stop at nothing to destroy her. But Emma was ready. She would face whatever came next with the same strength and courage she had found within herself. And no matter what, she would never be a pawn again. The night was quiet, too quiet. Emma stood in the dimly lit hallway of the mansion, her hand gripping the silver dagger the Vampire King had given her. The weight of it felt different now. It was no longer just a tool for self-defense. It was a symbol of her choice, her commitment to standing by the Vampire King's side. Her heart pounded in her chest as she approached the grand hall. Tonight felt different, heavier. She could feel the shift in the air. A sense of urgency hung in the mansion like a thick fog. The other vampire families were moving. They had been watching her, testing her, and now they were ready to strike. She could feel it in the atmosphere. As she entered the grand hall, the Vampire King was waiting for her. His back was turned, but she could sense his presence in the stillness of the room. You're ready, he said without turning around, his voice calm, yet filled with an edge that made Emma's pulse quicken. Tonight, we face them. Emma nodded, her grip tightening on the dagger. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady, though her heart raced. The Vampire King turned to face her, his eyes glinting in the low light. He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing her readiness, before he spoke again. There will be no second chances, Emma. Once they come, there is no going back. You must be decisive. You must show them that you are not just some pawn to be moved around at their will. His words echoed in her mind, the gravity of them settling deep within her. She wasn't just fighting for her survival anymore. She was fighting for her place in this world. I won't back down, she said, her voice stronger now. I'm not afraid anymore. The Vampire King gave her a small nod, as if approving of her resolve. Good. Let's go. They walked together through the corridors, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Emma's thoughts raced. What would happen when they faced the vampire families? Would she survive? Would they succeed in keeping her safe? Or would they be destroyed in the process? Her mind was filled with questions, but she pushed them aside. She couldn't afford to doubt herself now. She had made her choice, and there was no turning back. The large doors to the throne room opened, and Emma stepped inside, her eyes immediately drawn to the figures standing at the far end of the room. The Vampire King's most trusted allies stood by his side, their faces serious, filled with the same tension Emma felt. The room was vast, grand, but tonight, it felt suffocating. The long shadows cast by the torches along the walls seemed to stretch endlessly, as if the darkness itself was waiting for something. You've come, a voice boomed from the far end of the room. Emma's heart skipped a beat as she turned to face the newcomer. A tall, imposing vampire with silver hair and blood-red eyes stepped forward. His gaze locked onto hers, and for a moment, Emma felt a wave of dread wash over her. This was one of the leaders of the vampire families. She could feel the power emanating from him, a force that threatened to crush her. The Vampire King stepped forward, placing himself between Emma and the newcomer. We've had enough of your games, the Vampire King said, his voice cold and firm. This ends tonight. The silver-haired vampire laughed, a low, mocking sound that sent chills down Emma's spine. You think you can control this world, Alaric? He sneered. You think you can protect her from us? She is nothing more than a human, and humans are expendable. Emma felt a surge of anger rise within her, but she kept herself in check. She wasn't a helpless victim anymore. She had a role to play in this. She stepped forward, standing beside the vampire king, her grip on the dagger firm. I'm not just a human, she said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. And I won't be controlled by anyone. The silver-haired vampire's smile faltered for a split second, his eyes narrowing as he took in her words. The vampire king turned to her, a rare look of approval in his gaze. She's right, he said, his voice low but filled with conviction. And if any of you think you can take her from me, you will find out just how wrong you are. The room fell silent as the weight of the vampire king's words settled over them. The silver-haired vampire's gaze flickered between Emma and the vampire king, his expression calculating. We'll see how long your protection lasts, Alaric, he finally said, his voice dripping with disdain. You'll regret this. The tension in the room was unbearable, but Emma stood her ground, feeling a strength rise within her that she had never known before. The vampire king was right. This was just the beginning, and she would not back down. The silver-haired vampire turned and walked away, his allies following in tow. As the doors slammed shut behind them, Emma let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The vampire king turned to her, his expression unreadable. This is only the start, Emma, he said, his voice steady. The vampire families will come for us, but we will stand our ground. Emma nodded, her heart pounding with both fear and excitement. She was ready. She had chosen this path, and now there was no turning back. The battle had only just begun. The days following the tense encounter in the grand hall were filled with an uneasy quiet. Emma could feel the storm brewing just beyond the mansion walls. The threat from the vampire families was far from over, and the vampire king's words echoed in her mind. This was only the beginning. But despite the looming danger, something had shifted in Emma. The fear that once gripped her heart had started to loosen, replaced by a fierce determination she had never known. She was no longer a victim in this world. She was a player, someone who could stand up for herself and fight for her future. As the days passed, Emma continued her training, focusing on everything the vampire king had taught her. She trained with the dagger, learning to wield it with precision, but more importantly, she trained her mind. The vampire king had made it clear that power wasn't just about strength. It was about knowing when to act, when to hold back, and how to outsmart your enemies. But no amount of preparation could prepare her for what came next. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the mansion was thrown into chaos. The ground shook beneath their feet, and the walls seemed to tremble with a low, guttural roar. Emma's heart raced as she ran through the hallways, her footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness of the mansion. The vampire king's voice rang out through the corridors. They've come. Emma's stomach twisted with fear, but she didn't hesitate. She had trained for this moment. She was ready. She grabbed the silver dagger from her room and rushed to the grand hall, where the vampire king was already standing, his eyes sharp with focus. What's happening? She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The families, he said, his voice low, steady. They've come to test us, to test you. Emma's breath caught in her throat. This was it. The moment she had feared, the moment she had prepared for. She was about to face the full force of the vampire world. As they stepped into the courtyard, Emma saw them, figures moving in the shadows, their eyes glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. The air was thick with power, the atmosphere crackling with an energy that sent a chill down her spine. The vampire king stepped forward, standing tall and unflinching. You think you can come here and challenge me? He called. Out, his voice booming across the courtyard. The figures in the shadows moved, and from the darkness emerged the leaders of the vampire families, each one more formidable than the last. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood her ground, her grip tightening on the dagger. She wasn't just a bystander in this world anymore. This was her fight. The vampire king stepped aside, his eyes locking onto hers. You've earned your place, he said quietly. Now show them you can keep it. Emma nodded, her jaw clenched in determination. She could feel the weight of the situation, the danger that loomed just out of reach. But she was no longer the woman who had run from her past. She was stronger now. She had a purpose. The first vampire, a tall figure with crimson eyes, stepped forward. You think you can challenge us? He sneered. You're nothing but a human, caught in a world you don't understand. Emma didn't flinch. I'm not just a human, she said, her voice steady. I'm a force to be reckoned with. The vampire's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, Emma moved. With a swift motion, she threw the dagger with all the strength she could muster, aiming for the vampire's heart. But it wasn't the strike that mattered, it was the precision. The moment her dagger flew, the other vampires reacted, their movements a blur of speed and strength. They were fast, much faster than she had anticipated. But Emma wasn't just relying on her physical strength. She had learned to read the subtle signs, the small movements that told her exactly what her enemies would do next. As the vampire lunged toward her, Emma sidestepped, drawing another blade from her side. The fight was chaos, a blur of movement as the vampires surrounded her. But she didn't back down. She fought with everything she had, each strike a testament to the training and knowledge the Vampire King had given her. She had learned to trust herself, to fight with the confidence of someone who knew their worth. The Vampire King stood beside her, his eyes sharp and calculating as he fought off his own attackers. Stay focused, he called to her, his voice cutting through the noise. They will come for you first. Stay sharp. Emma's breath was ragged, her heart racing, but she kept her focus. Every strike, every move, was calculated. She wasn't just fighting to survive. She was fighting to prove she belonged in this world, to show the vampire families that she wasn't a pawn. She was a player. The battle raged on, but slowly, the tide began to turn. The vampire families underestimated her, underestimated the strength she had gained. One by one, they began to fall, retreating back into the shadows from which they had come. As the last of the attackers disappeared into the night, Emma stood, breathing heavily, but victorious. The courtyard was eerily quiet now, the only sound the soft rustle of the wind. The Vampire King turned to her, his expression unreadable. You did well, he said, his voice low, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of respect. Emma wiped the blood from her hands, her heart still pounding in her chest. This wasn't over, but for the first time, she felt like she could face whatever came next. She had proven her place in this world, and she wasn't about to let anyone take that from her. The aftermath of the battle left the mansion in a tense silence. Emma stood in the courtyard, her body sore and her mind still processing the chaos that had unfolded only moments before. The fight had been brutal, each of the vampire family's members relentless in their attack. Yet, in the end, she had proven herself capable, not only of defending herself, but also of standing her ground in a world that had once seemed so foreign and terrifying. The Vampire King stood beside her, his expression unreadable. He had watched her fight with a calmness that both reassured and unnerved her. He had always been a figure of power and control, but now, she realized, he had been observing her growth, seeing the woman she had become. You fought well, he said, his voice as steady as ever. You've earned their respect. Emma wiped the blood from her face, her fingers trembling. It wasn't the fear of the fight that shook her, but the realization that what had just happened was just a taste of what was to come. The vampire families had made their move, but they had only just begun to test her. What now? She asked, her voice firm despite the exhaustion creeping into her bones. The Vampire King glanced at her, his eyes dark with the weight of the situation. Now, we prepare for what's coming next. This was only the beginning. The families will regroup, and they won't be satisfied until they see you fall. His words hung heavy in the air, and Emma felt a familiar tension knot in her stomach. The battle had been fierce, but the real war was just beginning. She had proven herself in the heat of combat, but now, she had to prove she could survive in a world of manipulation, deceit, and endless power struggles. You've come a long way, Emma, the Vampire King continued, his voice softening. But there is still much for you to learn. This world is dangerous, and it will not hesitate to tear you apart if you let your guard down. Emma nodded, the weight of his words settling deep within her. She wasn't just fighting for her survival anymore. She was fighting for her place in a world that saw her as an outsider, a human who had somehow become entangled in the politics and power plays of vampires. She had no illusions about what lay ahead. She knew the vampire families would not stop. They would come for her again and again, testing her, pushing her to the brink. And each time, She would have to prove herself worthy of the Vampire King's protection. As they walked back into the mansion, the hall seemed quieter than usual, the air thick with the remnants of the battle. Emma could still feel the adrenaline pulsing through her veins, but it was quickly replaced by a bone-deep weariness. She had fought hard, but she knew this was only the beginning. There was no rest, no time to relax. Every day would bring new challenges, and she would have to face them head-on. The Vampire King led her into the study, a room filled with ancient books and maps of territories she was still trying to understand. He motioned for her to sit, and she did, her body aching from the fight. "You've shown that you can defend yourself," he said, sitting across from her. "But there is more to this world than brute strength. You need to learn the intricacies of vampire politics, the alliances, the betrayals. You need to understand how to navigate this world, how to play the game." Emma's mind raced. She had already seen how quickly allegiances could shift, how trust was a rare commodity in this world. "How do I learn that?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling inside her. The Vampire King's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no humor in it. "You learn by watching, by listening. You observe the way the other vampires move, the subtle signs of power and weakness, and you learn how to use that knowledge to your advantage." Emma's eyes narrowed as she absorbed his words. She had always been someone who reacted, someone who fought when she had no other choice. But now, she realized, she needed to think beyond that. She needed to become more than just a fighter. She needed to be a strategist, someone who could anticipate her enemies' moves and outmaneuver them before they even had the chance to strike. The Vampire King leaned forward, his expression intense. "You're no longer just a pawn in this world, Emma," he said, his voice low and filled with an unspoken promise. "But if you're going to survive, you must learn to think like a player. You must learn to control your fate, or others will control it for you." The weight of his words pressed heavily on her chest. She wasn't just fighting for her life anymore. She was fighting for her future. She had chosen this path, and now, she had to walk it with eyes wide open. The road ahead would be filled with danger, but she was no longer afraid. She had survived the first test, and now, she would face whatever came next with the same determination. The vampire families had tested her, but she would show them she was not someone to be underestimated. Emma stood up, her resolve hardening. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady and filled with purpose. The Vampire King nodded, his approval clear. "Then let's begin." The war was far from over, but Emma knew she was no longer the woman who had fled in fear. She had found her strength, and with it, she would fight for her place in this dangerous, unpredictable world. The days following the battle were filled with an unsettling calm. Emma could feel the weight of what had happened. She had proven herself, but that was only the beginning. The vampire families had tasted her strength, but they were not ones to back down so easily. Emma knew they would return, and each time they came, the stakes would be higher. She had come a long way from the woman who had run from her abusive past, but now, she was not just fighting for her survival. She was fighting for her place in a world that would never fully accept her. The Vampire King had been distant, his focus elsewhere, preparing for the next wave of attacks. Emma's life had become a cycle of training and strategy, each day bringing her closer to a confrontation she wasn't sure she was ready for. Yet, with each passing day, she grew more confident. The vampire world had tested her in ways she never thought possible, and she had passed each test with resolve. One evening, as she was practicing in the training room, the Vampire King entered, his face shadowed with worry. "They've moved," he said, his voice low. "The other families are coming together. They know we're a threat now." Emma felt her stomach twist with apprehension. She had known this day would come, but hearing it from him made it all the more real. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. The Vampire King's gaze softened, but there was no mistaking the gravity of the situation. "We fight, Emma. But this time, we do it on our terms. We won't let them dictate the game. We will make them come to us." Emma's mind raced. "And how do we do that?" "We strike first," the Vampire King said, his voice filled with a cold determination that matched the power he exuded. "We show them that we will not be intimidated, that we will not back down. You will take your place, not just as my ally, but as a force they can no longer ignore." Emma nodded, the weight of his words settling over her. She was no longer just his protégé. She was a player in this game, and it was time for her to step up. The Vampire King turned, motioning for her to follow him. "There is a place I want you to see," he said. Emma followed, her mind whirling with thoughts of what the Vampire King meant. He led her through the mansion, down hidden corridors she hadn't yet explored. They arrived at a large, circular room, its walls lined with ancient weapons and artifacts. In the center stood a stone pedestal, upon which rested a large, dark crystal. The crystal pulsed with a strange energy, its light flickering like a heartbeat. "This," the Vampire King said, "is the key to our survival." Emma stepped forward, her curiosity piqued. "What is it?" she asked. The Vampire King looked at her, his expression unreadable. "This crystal is an ancient artifact, a source of immense power. It was created long before the vampire families rose to power. For centuries, it has been kept hidden, but now, it will be the weapon we use to secure our future." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "And how do we use it?" The Vampire King's gaze sharpened. "We don't just use it, Emma. We control it. The crystal has the ability to amplify our powers, to make us stronger than we ever imagined. But it's not just about raw power. It's about strategy. This crystal will allow us to outthink our enemies, to predict their moves before they even make them." Emma felt a surge of excitement. This was the key to winning, to finally having the upper hand in this endless game of power and control. But there was a dark warning in the Vampire King's eyes. "The crystal is dangerous," he continued. "It has a mind of its own, and it can turn against us if we aren't careful. We must use it wisely, or it will destroy us." Emma nodded, understanding the weight of his words. She had come to realize that nothing in this world was simple. Every choice had a cost, and every action had consequences. "I understand," she said, her voice steady. "We'll use it wisely." The Vampire King's eyes softened, and for a moment, Emma saw the man behind the power. "You're ready," he said. "But remember, Emma, this world will always test you. There will always be those who want to see you fail. You must be prepared for anything." Emma's resolve hardened. She had come too far to back down now. "I'm ready," she said, her voice filled with certainty. "I won't let them win." The Vampire King gave a small, approving nod. "Good. Then let's prepare for the final battle." The air in the mansion grew heavier as Emma stepped forward, the dark crystal now a symbol of the fight ahead. She had taken her place, and she was ready to fight for everything she had come to believe in. The vampire families might think they had the power, but Emma had learned one thing. True power wasn't just about strength. It was about control, strategy, and knowing when to strike. And she would strike when the time was right. The final battle was upon them. The Vampire King stood beside Emma, his eyes burning with an intensity she had never seen before. The mansion, once a place of safety, now felt like a battlefield. The vampire families had gathered, their power vast, their intentions clear. They came to challenge the Vampire King, to test his rule, and to take Emma down. She had proven herself capable before, but now, the stakes were higher. This time, there would be no holding back. As the doors to the grand hall swung open, Emma could feel the air shift. The tension was palpable, like a living thing crawling under her skin. The Vampire King stepped forward, his movements calculated, his confidence unwavering. He had prepared for this day, but even he knew that this battle would be unlike any they had faced before. The vampire families stood in a row, their faces cold, their eyes calculating. The leader of the opposing faction, a tall vampire with silver hair and a cruel smile, stepped forward. "Alaric," he sneered, "you've come a long way, but your time is up." The Vampire King met his gaze, his own expression fierce. "You underestimate me," he said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "And you underestimate her," he added, his eyes flickering toward Emma. The vampire families laughed, a sound that sent chills down Emma's spine. "She's nothing more than a human," the leader mocked. "You think she can survive in this world? She's weak. She has no place here." Emma's heart raced, but she didn't flinch. She had heard those words before, had lived with them for years. She had been called weak, insignificant, but she knew who she was now. She wasn't just a human anymore. She was part of this world, and she would prove it. Stepping forward, she locked eyes with the leader, her grip tightening on the silver dagger. "I'm not weak," she said, her voice steady. "I've learned to fight, and I will fight for my place here." The room fell silent. The vampire family stared at her, their expressions unreadable. For a moment, there was only the sound of Emma's heartbeat, steady and strong in her chest. Then, the leader of the opposing faction sneered. "You'll regret this," he said, before signaling his followers. The battle began. Emma moved with precision, her body reacting instinctively to every move, every strike. She had trained for this moment, and now, she was ready. The vampires around her were fast, their movements fluid, but Emma had learned to read their subtle signs, to predict their actions before they even made them. She sidestepped a strike, dodging with ease, and drove her dagger into the side of one of her attackers. He collapsed to the ground, his eyes wide with shock. "This is just the beginning," the Vampire King said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Fight with purpose. They will stop at nothing to destroy you." Emma nodded, her focus unshaken. She fought with everything she had, her movements a blend of speed and strategy. She was no longer just reacting, she was in control. She could feel the power coursing through her veins, a power she had earned, a power that came from her strength and determination. The vampires around her faltered, their attacks becoming less coordinated. Emma's mind raced, calculating each move, anticipating their next steps. She was no longer the pawn in their game. She was a player. She saw the leader of the opposing faction moving toward the Vampire King, his eyes filled with malice. With a burst of speed, Emma closed the distance between them and threw herself at him. She didn't hesitate. She didn't wait. She knew what had to be done. The leader barely had time to react as Emma drove the silver dagger into his chest, her aim precise. He staggered back, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You were always too arrogant," Emma said, her voice low. "You thought you could control this world, but you were wrong." The leader collapsed to the ground, his body crumbling in defeat. The remaining vampires looked around, unsure of what to do. The battle had shifted. The Vampire King stepped forward, his eyes burning with fury. "This ends now," he said. "I will not allow any of you to tear this world apart." One by one, the remaining vampires retreated, realizing they had underestimated the strength of the Vampire King and his unexpected ally. Emma stood tall beside him, her breath heavy, but her spirit unbroken. She had fought for her life, for her place in this world, and she had won. As the last of the vampires disappeared into the night, the Vampire King turned to Emma, his expression softening. "You've proven yourself," he said. "Not just to them, but to yourself. You are no longer just a part of this world. You are a force to be reckoned with." Emma felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of accomplishment. She had come so far, but she knew this wasn't the end. This world would always be full of danger, full of challenges, but she was no longer afraid. She had learned to fight, and now, she would stand tall, ready for whatever came next. The mansion was silent once again, the storm that had raged inside now over. Emma stood beside the Vampire King, her hand still clutching the dagger that had symbolized her transformation. She had fought for her place in this world, and she had earned it. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, she felt ready to face it. No longer a pawn. She was a player, and the game had only just begun. Vampire stories often captivate readers with their blend of danger, power, and romance, and this tale is no exception. The journey of Emma, a woman thrust into a world of ancient vampires and deadly power struggles, unfolds in a rich and thrilling narrative. As Emma proves her strength and resolves, the stakes rise higher, pushing her to confront the darkest forces in the vampire world. From intense battles to the deep, complex politics of the vampire families, these vampire stories are filled with unexpected twists that keep readers hooked. The Vampire King, once a mysterious and powerful figure, becomes both a mentor and a protector, leading Emma through the intricacies of survival in a world that doesn't forgive weakness. As they face enemies, forge alliances, and navigate a treacherous path, Emma's transformation from a frightened woman to a fierce contender is one of the most compelling aspects of this story. The intricate blend of supernatural power, strategic battles, and heart-pounding suspense makes this one of the most engaging vampire stories. Through every challenge, Emma finds herself tested, not just by vampires, but by the very world she is now a part of. Her journey is a testament to the strength of will, the price of power, and the eternal fight for survival in a world of vampires.